everyone, and welcome to that Star Trek podcast, your place for a detailed analysis and speculation of all things Trek. My name is Sean Ray, and I really hope that the Borg have a strong VPN since they tell their IP address to everyone that they meet. Joining me in the historic Infinite Potato Studios, we have Rick. How's it going, sir?
I just want to say, if you hear any rumblings, it's not the big cup of coffee I drank. It's pockets of CO2.
Okay. All right. John is here. How's it going, sir?
I am well.
And also joining us, we have Tom. How are you, sir?
Who said these moments were any less exciting when you know the outcome?
I knew somebody was going to say that. We are continuing our time travel series tonight. We'll get into that in just a minute. But first, I wanted to talk. I have a little bit of Trek news. It's not really news, and that's kind of why I want to talk about it, because it's fun to see the way that rumors spread because somebody says one little thing. And we're going to talk about a spoiler for Picard season 2, but I'm going to tell you why it's really not a spoiler. So everybody knows that John Delancey is coming to Picard season 2 to play Q. And actually, they've said that he's going to be in season 2 and 3 because they're filming all of that together to kind of make up for some of the time that they lost during COVID. They're going to go ahead and film season 3 while they have everybody together. Plus, their main cast member is in his 80s, so they kind of want to go ahead and get some of that principal photography out of the way. But he had John Delancey had an interview recently in the last week, and this is the quote from the interview. "I'm on the next season of Picard, and Sir Patrick and I have had a whole bunch of scenes which we thoroughly enjoyed working with each other. I've got one coming up with Data this coming Tuesday, so yeah, we're moving along." So everybody's like, Data's coming back for season 2. Number one, all right, let me tell you why this is not news. Number one, they said that this season is all about time travel. I have no doubt we're going to see Data. But at the same time, Delancey may have meant to say Brent. And it just came out Data, or something like that. We know Brent Spiner's on the show because he's playing Soong's great grandnephew or whatever. So yeah, it's just one of those things where John Delancey says one thing and the internet's kind of freaking out. Oh, Data's coming back. Yeah, maybe. It also might be B4. It might be Lore. And I don't know. They may make up a whole new Android friend to play. But Brent Spiner has said, he said after season 1 that he's kind of done with Data,
But is he done with paychecks?
That's true. Well, I mean, he's on the show. He's on the show. He's getting paid either way. So
you see, I thought you were going to bring up the non-story that's been going around, where even in the headlines they're like, Shazad Latif says he's heard rumblings about Section 31, but really there's nothing here. And then literally I saw a headline that was like almost word for word that.
Yeah.
And it was just somebody was talking. He was giving an interview for some other project he's doing, and someone brought up the Section 31 show, and he's like, maybe.
Yeah, he probably couldn't tell you if he wanted to. But I don't think it's any secret that Section 31 has kind of been put on the back burner for right now. They've got plenty of Trek on the air and coming to the air rapidly in the next few months, actually. So,
yeah,
we're going to talk about time travel again tonight. Tonight, we're going to be discussing the 9th episode of the 5th season of Star Trek: The Next Generation, which was titled A Matter of Time, written by Rick Berman, directed by Paul Lynch. And the original air date was November 18th, 1991. And you don't realize how many episodes start with the words "a matter of" until you start to search for the title for this episode. There's A Matter of Honor. There's all kinds of stuff.
You know what? I didn't realize Berman wrote this. That makes a lot of sense in regards to the one thing in this episode I really loathed. We'll get to that.
Okay, we'll get to this episode is most famous for being the one that Matt Frewer stars in. And he's one of those guys that if you're nerdy enough to know who he is, then you tend to see him all over the place. I see him all the time. Because he's still making stuff. It's not like he's not retired or anything. He's still working fairly frequently. If you don't know who he is, he's an actor that blends in. You know, he gets absorbed by the roles that he plays. Of course, he's probably the most famous for playing Max Headroom, which if you're under the age of 30, you might not have ever seen Max Headroom or heard of him. But Max was a CG talking head that was originally conceived to be the host of a music video show in the UK. And they ended up making a TV movie and a sci-fi series about Max Headroom, and it lasted for like 2 seasons in the UK, and which 2 seasons over there is like 14 episodes, you know. So, and then after that, he was the spokesperson for New Coke for a long time. So
he had a talk show. That's where I first saw him.
Yeah, it was like a music video show, and he was like the intro guy. He introduced all these music videos, and
he interviewed guests.
Yeah.
I want to say
it was kind of like
Showtime,
Beavis and Butthead, or Space Ghost Coast to Coast. It was that sort of
very Space Ghost
pastiche, yeah. But you know, just in case, just to clarify, he was not CG. He was the character was supposed to be computer generated, but no, he was just wearing a rubber mask and loads of latex and
right.
There's actually I haven't looked for it, but I understand that there are like programs around the internet that you can get that'll do that to your voice. That'll Max Headroom your voice.
Well,
or
he was also in a great Art of Noise video, the Paranoia, which I love that video.
What were you gonna say, Tom?
A slow internet connection will do the same effect.
Yeah, it's true. I was gonna say, kids, if you're watching, if you've ever seen Back to the Future Part 2, and you recall the scene where Marty goes to Cafe 80s, then all the waiters are a takeoff of Max Headroom. So they've got the Michael Jackson and the Ronald Reagan and the Lee Ayatollah, and they're all doing that Max Headroom kind of shtick. My wife makes a comment last night while we're watching this, and she says, "Why does he remind me of Jim Carrey?" And
that's not an unfair comparison.
I bet he's heard that more than once, because I wonder. So Matt Frewer kind of got started in the early 80s. His first role was in like 1982 or something like that. And Jim Carrey didn't come along and really make it big until sometime around 93, 94. I mean, he was in stuff before that, but like Ace Ventura Pet Detective came out in 95, I think. So
Living Color. Yeah,
well, in Living Color is where he really started to make a name for himself among the youths. So, so I kind of wonder if Matt Frewer had come along a few years later, or if he had gotten on a show that got him the kind of exposure that Jim Carrey had, if Matt Frewer would be Jim Carrey now, if he would have been the Riddler, you know. I wonder if Matt Frewer ever watches Jim Carrey and is like, yeah, I was doing that 10 years before he was. You know?
Matt Frewer is an actor. And
okay, Jim Carrey is a good actor.
Let me finish. I'm not saying Jim Carrey is not an actor. I'm saying Matt Frewer is not a comedian. Matt Frewer is not touring, doing comedy shows. He doesn't have comedy specials. He's not.
Well, no,
and even his roles aren't particularly comedic. Not always. Not. I wouldn't even say not even usually. I would say he's a character actor who does a whole lot of sci-fi, and sometimes he's funny. I think he's. I don't think he's not. I mean, I like him. I think he's great.
Yeah.
But he's not. He and Jim Carrey do different things.
Well, it's like Jim Carrey was the Riddler, and Matt Frewer was Lawnmower Man. So
I feel like you're making my point.
Yeah. But like I said, he's still out there. He's still doing stuff. I mean, last year he was in that Perry Mason adaptation that they did on HBO. And he was good in it. He's been in The Walking Dead, The Magicians. He was in Altered Carbon.
Magicians. Yeah.
He was in Castlevania. And it just goes on and on. You know, he's He's in a lot of stuff.
I know him from Eureka.
Sci-fi certified at this point. Like in any series that's on for more than a season or two, he's probably going to show up at some point.
Yeah. Or if it's based on anything Stephen King has done, he'll be on that. For some reason, there's like this what's it called? The diagram. What's the diagram?
Venn diagram.
Yeah, the Venn diagram of Matt Frewer and Stephen King. Somehow they bump into each other a lot. So
now, should we get the elephant in the room out of the way before we move into the actual episode about
you're
who
gonna
this
have to
part
point
was
out
really written for?
I don't know where the elephant is. You'll have to point him out.
The fact that Berlinghoff Rasmussen was supposed to be played by Robin Williams.
Well, that character was actually lined up for 3 or 4 different people before they settled on Matt. But yeah, they had Robin Williams in mind when they wrote the character. And
he was going to do it right up until fairly close to shooting, and then his schedule wouldn't allow it.
Yeah, and there's a lot of conflicting stories because it says on IMDb that he couldn't do it because he had to do Hook. But Hook actually finished shooting before they started filming this episode. So it was something else. It wasn't.
Well,
Hook.
not necessarily, because if principal photography can end on a movie, and the actors could still be obligated to be available for reshoots or pickups or stuff like that.
No, this episode came out in November of '91, and Hook was released in December of '91. It had to be finished. That's like 1 month. So it was something else that he was doing. But yeah, he didn't make it. But there's kind of a story of Robin Williams for a couple of things. They wanted him for Riddler in Batman Forever, and it didn't happen. It went to Jim Carrey. And I've heard 3 or 4 other things that it was supposed to be Robin Williams, but it was somebody else.
And I'm kind of glad that it wasn't. I adored Robin Williams. Did you ever see his stand up? I forget what it was something like Return to Broadway or something like that. It was his first major stand-up concert he'd done for like 20 years. It came out in somewhere around 2001, 2002, something like that.
Probably, yeah.
And I almost went to the hospital because I almost had a coronary just laughing so hard at that thing. I loved him on stage. I think I've told you guys on some show about getting his Reality What a Concept album for Christmas in 1979 or 80. This was at the peak of Mork and Mindy. And so I was 16, maybe 16, 17, something like that. And asked for the record for Christmas. And my mom saw the warning. There was this was back at where, warning adult adult content, whatever, on the record. And my mom was like, "It's Mork. How bad can it be?"
Yeah. Famous last words.
Yeah. And so, we all opened our presents, and then it was time. My mom's like, "Okay, you're going to help me make Christmas cookies." I'm like, "Okay, can I put my new record on the big stereo?" And she's like, "Sure." And it starts off, and it's Robin Williams doing the Robin Williams thing. But then he gets to his first. It's like, and now an impression, a New York echo. "Hello, shut the f-. And my mom just, all the color drained out of her face, and she almost dropped her coffee. And I've never seen a record come off of the record player so fast since.
My mom used to do that, and she would, but when she would hear the word or she would see an image on TV, she would say it as if I put it there. like I remember watching. Me and my brother got into Bruce Lee movies when I was probably about 13 or 14. We started renting these Bruce Lee movies and watching them. And there was a sex scene in one of them. I think it was Enter the Dragon. Anyway, this lady comes in. And she is completely naked. And my mom goes, "Sean and Joey," like that. And I said, "We did not make that lady take her clothes off."
But anyway, the reason I brought that up is, as much as I love Robin Williams, I think that I don't think he would have been a good fit for this episode because, especially at that point in time, I don't know that he could have reined in his Robin Williams-ness.
Right.
And that's the thing that Frewer does really well. Like you said, he still got a style. You still know it's him, but he plays the role. Mm. And I know Robin Williams can act. Especially he did Dead Poet Society and
he could get dark if he
did a lot of creepy movies I'll never ever watch. And What Dreams May Come and The Fisher King and all of that stuff. But I don't think, given what I know about how things were on the set for TNG, I don't think he would have behaved himself.
Yeah, we would have had some colorful stories, I'm sure. So here's the synopsis from IMDb. A time traveler claiming to be from the 26th century arrives to witness an attempt to save a doomed planet. First of all, the very first thing that jumped out when I was watching this is he says he's from the 26th century. And then he says, I've traveled back about 300 years. No, you didn't. Because they're in the 24th century. That's like maybe a little over 200 years that you travel back. He says he's from late 26th century. This episode takes place in like 2368, something like that. So that's not 300 years. So that tells you, I don't know if that was just a mistake or if they put that in there to let you know he's not entirely on the up and up. And that's from the get-go. That's before the opening credits. So
there are many explanations for that.
Yeah.
Maybe he traveled to the future first. And now his first stop was 100 years in the future. So now he traveled back 300 years to where they are now.
Yeah. Yeah.
Or maybe the script writers just didn't give a shit.
I think it's probably that.
Well, since the script writer was Rick Berman, he probably did. Yeah. The USS Enterprise is trying to fix.
Maybe rounding is different in the future.
Extreme weather problems resulting from an asteroid collision on the planet Penthara 4, a colony with a population of some 20 million people. Worf sees this space-time distortion and tells Picard. Picard's like, "Turn around, let's go see what it is." Those people can wait with their planet dying and all that kind of stuff. And he sends a distress. He sends a signal. He sends a thing. Yeah, he asked. He sends a signal, and Worf says, "They say that you should move over." The Enterprise has no plan to move at all. We're not doing what anyone's. No, you need to move over. What do you mean? He moves over, and then Matt Frewer appears and says, "You're exactly where I needed to be." Well, couldn't you just like shift over yourself a little bit? And why did you need to beam in right there?
You got to make an entrance.
Yeah, but the Enterprise has shields, right? You're not supposed to be able to just beam on board like that.
Well, okay. There's a problem with this episode that is by no means unique to the Next Generation, and that is whenever Star Trek does a quote unquote comedy episode, they tend to get really fast and loose with their tech and with their continuity stuff. Because this episode, I enjoyed it. I'm not here to crap on this episode at all, but the crew was very much out of character for a lot of it. And at one point it was like, all right, I'm going to keep listening to this and then I'm going to go empty the dishwasher because I can't handle watching Riker be, a jaw-dropped goob any longer. I've got to go get away from the screen for a bit.
Well, I mean, on one hand, Riker was the one that was making a little bit of sense because he was like, why are we we're just trusting that this guy's telling us the truth. Why are we doing that? And Picard says, well, his credentials check out. Check out against what? He doesn't exist yet. How have you checked his credentials? Did he show you the little blank piece of paper that the doctor carries around with him everywhere? That checks out. But, okay, so he introduces himself. He says his name is Berlinghoff Rasmussen, and he's a historian from the future. Rasmussen doesn't really want to answer any questions about the future because do they actually say the words temporal prime directive in this episode?
No.
I don't think
because
that's a temporal prime directive. Well, Picard basically asks him, "Are you not telling us? This is later in the episode. Are you not telling us because of some temporal equivalent of the prime directive?"
yeah, that's
But
what I was going to say.
I don't think he I don't think he says that.
I knew
No,
later on in the episode he starts talking about the prime directive. I couldn't remember if those words. I know those words actually weren't said that I remember until Enterprise.
No,
But,
those words were first said in Trials and Tribulations.
okay, Deep Space Nine. Okay.
Yeah.
So anyway, he doesn't want to answer any questions about the future because saying anything about the
I may
future
be wrong about that.
could alter it. Could alter the future.
I think it may have been Voyager. Now that I think about it,
Where's Scott
Where
Madison when you need him? Tom Madison, fill in for Scott. When was the first time that we heard temporal prime directive?
I'm really thinking it's Voyager. I can't do the episode titles and production numbers like he can, but
Yeah. So Dr. Crusher, it's funny because as soon as he finishes saying, "I don't want to answer any questions about the future," that's when Dr. Crusher says, "Well, what have they cured Tellurian plague yet?" And it's like, I just told you I can't answer questions about the future. Which Tellurian plague, I think, is the first time we've ever heard them say that. But that comes up again in Enterprise, that episode about the augments. That's the virus that they were stealing. It was the Tellurian plague. He stole like some vials of that or something like that to use as
it's Voyager
as a weapon. Okay.
The first mention of temporal prime directive was a Voyager.
So Troy says that he's hiding something, but she doesn't know if he's hiding the fact that he's not who he says he is. Which her empath powers are kind of dependent on what the script needs are for that episode. Yeah, I mean, yeah, she would know that there's something up, but she doesn't know what. I like how Rasmussen calls her Picard's empath at one point, and she kind of chuckles at it a little bit. Picard's empath, huh? But yeah, you're right about them being out of.
Really wanted.
Go ahead.
She was the one who was like totally over him right away.
Yeah, you were right about them kind of acting out of character because Crusher she acts like she has a crush on him.
That's what I was talking about when Berman. Okay, yeah, because I never got that. I never understood why Beverly was getting all squishy about him. I'm like, this is totally out of character for her.
Yeah.
I thought.
Well, yeah, and then the scene where he kind of makes a pass at her, she kind of rejects him. I was like, well, she's been flirting with him through this whole episode, and now she's rejecting him. That doesn't really make a lot of sense. Mm-hmm. So we don't really want to go that far in the episode. Data tries to ask Rasmussen whether or not he's alive in the 26th century. It's like all of them want to ignore what he just said about not answering questions and keep asking him questions about the future. And so he tells him, Data needs to keep those assumptions to those questions and things to himself. So, but he gives everybody these questionnaires. I want you to answer all these questions, and it'll only take you a couple hours. Of course, Worf doesn't want to answer questionnaire. Riker doesn't want it. Crusher's fine with it. Geordi thinks that Rasmussen is there to watch this mission, which when they get to Panthera 4, they've kind of got this plan that they're going to fire phasers into these pockets of CO2 and release the gas, and it's supposed to create this greenhouse effect that's supposed to help hold the planet's heat in long enough for the planet to heal itself from this asteroid impact, because there's a lot of particulates in the atmosphere and it's blocking sunlight, and they're going through a quote unquote nuclear winter. I say nuclear winter because I read something that said nuclear winter is not really a thing.
Well, it is and it isn't.
For people who are listening and not watching it, every time Sean says nuclear winter, he's doing air quotes. He's not just saying it over and over like it's different every time.
Yeah. Nuclear winter.
Nuclear winter was it was.
Well, there was a theory that if they set all the oil fields on fire in the Middle East, that it would create so much smoke that it would block out the sun. And then in like 94, that actually did happen, and it didn't block out the sun. So,
well, all the oil fields in the Middle East is different from a nuclear war.
Yeah.
Well, this is kind of what is happening here. It's not they're liking it to nuclear winter, but that's not really what's happening here. There's just a lot of crap in the atmosphere, and it's blocking the sun. Nuclear winter is something else, but that's the comparison that they made for some reason in this episode. So anyway, that's the mission that they're on, and Geordi has decided that Rasmussen, you're here to watch that. So LaForge figures out the parameters of how much CO2 to inject into the air, and he leaves to transport to the planet's surface. I can't talk. I'm sorry. Rasmussen steals a pad, and that's been left on the display table there before going to the bridge to witness the event. And that's when he tells Data what Tom said at the beginning of the episode, that who said these moments were less exciting when you know the outcome? And then Data says, I don't think anyone has ever said that.
Kind of defines our fandom, though.
Yeah.
I've seen them so many times, but
so what we start to see through the episode is during all these scenes, usually like right at the end of the scene, we'll see him slip something into his pocket. So we know he's doing something other than just observing. He's stealing things for some reason. But other than the dermal regenerator that Dr. Crusher just flat out gives him, you mind if I take this and look at it? Sure. Yeah. Take whatever you need.
Got a hole in the wall over there that'll make me another one in a second.
Yeah, really. Which that's one thing to point out, that he could have just gone to if he had just stolen the replicator.
Well, if he had just
had
the things, they probably would have let him have it.
Yeah, I really want to look at some of these ancient things. Yeah, can I have some?
Can I have some of these for for the archives for the museum? And like, yeah, and that would have been that. Like, he wouldn't have to. Scot-free, he would have gotten away.
Yeah.
Or he's an antique collector, and, just wants to get them in mint condition.
Sure.
But of course, that's kind of the whole point, is he's incompetent. Otherwise, there wouldn't be an episode.
Yeah. Sure. But then there's the whole argument of, if I take that phaser, what if that is the phaser that they need to stop some bad guy in the future? And now it's not here, and that doesn't happen, and the future changes and all that jazz. But I digress.
All right.
The mission is pulled off successfully. They do release CO2 into the atmosphere. But then, a few minutes later, there starts to be a lot of earthquakes and some volcanic activity. And the problem just gets worse, because all this volcanic ash is going up into the atmosphere, exacerbating the problem and making the particulate matter even thicker. So
that's why you don't test in a production environment.
Exactly. We think this is going to work. Let's try it right now. Forge sends a transmission to Data and from the surface of the planet, and they put together an idea that they have to fix the problem on the planet, and it is that they're kind of use the Enterprise as a lightning rod, draw that stuff out of the atmosphere, send it out into space. But if we make one tiny miscalculation, we can burn off the entire planet's atmosphere and kill everyone.
That'll never happen.
Yeah, so this is the big scene, I guess, towards the end of the episode, is when Rasmussen goes to Picard's ready room. Picard calls him to the ready room and tells him, look, I know that you've got some kind of a prime directive, but I have a prime directive and I break it all the time.
So you should break yours too.
Because it's I break it when it's the right thing to do, and this is the right thing to do. But he won't do it, and which really, you can tell it really pisses Picard off. So he wants him to tell him what he needs to do, and he can't. He can't. I can't tell you what to do. And he's very dismissive about it. He's just like, all these people are already dead from where I'm from, so it doesn't really matter. All of you are dead too. But Picard decides to do the thing, so they do the thing, and it works instantly, and the day is saved. And then Rasmussen was like, "Well, that's fun. Time to go." And he just takes off.
All right, I'm gonna head out.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm gonna head out. And he goes back to the shuttle bay to get in his ship. And of course, everyone is there waiting for him. And they say, funny thing, there's a bunch of stuff that's turned up missing around the ship since you've been here. I bet if we look inside there, it'll be there. It's like, well, you can't go in there. Riker says, hey, if we don't go in there, you're not going on there. And he says, well, the only one I'm going to let come in there is Data. So Data goes in with him and finds all this stuff that he's stolen. One of Geordi's visors in there. There's a phaser. There's a tricorder, a pad.
You wouldn't possibly miss that.
Yeah.
Now he's going to go looking around for it. Sorry.
Which they've never established that Geordi has a bunch of visors. I've always assumed that he only had one, but I don't know.
You keep a backup your old glasses when you get a new script. So
yeah. This is the thick, clunky one that I never wear.
Some crewman's wooden leg is in there.
It's
got the more I think about it.
It's got like half a dozen burnout pixels in the right corner. I really don't. I don't like it.
You're absolutely right. I mean, yes, for the purposes of the episode, he needed to steal the stuff. I get that. That's fine. But there's really no reason. He didn't even need to actually steal stuff. Like, he could have just downloaded the blueprints to all of that stuff. He's supposed to be an inventor.
Yeah.
He figured out a time machine. He can put together a tricorder or whatever.
Yeah, he says the blueprints would be more helpful, you would think.
You would think. Yeah. He'd have to reverse engineer it all anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah, because his plan is to take what we find out in the scene is that is a surprise, is you probably figured it out by now anyway. He's not from the future. He's from the past. The ship is from the future. He stole it from somebody who time traveled back to where he was from, which is like 22nd century New Jersey or something like that. And his plan is to steal all the stuff, take it back with him, and he's going to, quote unquote, invent one every year or so. Right. So, but yeah, it's reverse engineering, which the field of work that I'm in, there are laws. I talked to some of the engineers at my job. There are laws that you can't take another company's blueprint and make an item from it.
Sure.
But there's not as many laws about taking their item and making a blueprint from it. So it's just reverse engineering.
How many laws are there about going to the future and stealing things?
Not as many as you would think.
I mean, I don't know what you make at your job, but
because okay, so he gets arrested. I guess Worf is essentially arresting him when he takes him to the brig. But I'm trying to think.
The definition of arrested, I think.
Yeah, well, I mean, he never says, Rasmussen, you're under arrest for thievery and stealing things and trying to kidnap Data. Well, I'm taking you to the brig. I started thinking last night, it's like, how bad was his crime? I mean, until he kidnapped Data, all he was guilty of is larceny.
Yeah.
Which I don't know what the 24th century laws are. I don't know what 24th century laws are, but I mean, 6 months probation in today's time, probably.
I was thinking about this too. So when I started watching, or rather, right before I started watching it, I had confused, and I know, whatever. I'm sorry, I'm not the big Star Trek guy. I confused this episode with the one with Saul Rubinek, the collector one.
Most toys.
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, and like Data's like, yeah, I can't let you do this. And I was like waiting for that. I was like, oh, this isn't that one. But yes, I had forgotten how this ends. Sean, do you want to say how it ends before I talk about it?
Well, you talking about where Dana tells him, I assume that panel will work whether you're conscious or not.
No, that was a cool line. But
and then
they arrest him, and Matt Frewer's like, okay, look, fine, I'm sorry, I'll give all the stuff back, but I've got to get back on the ship. The thing is set to a timer. It's going to leave.
Mm-hmm.
Like, yeah, well, that's tough kitty. No, seriously, like, I got to get on. I'm going to be stranded. Like, I'm sorry, all right? I'm sorry, but can I get back on the ship? They're like, nah.
And it does. It leaves. It's gone, and he's stuck there. Yeah.
And they strand him centuries away out of his time, and they basically say, we're going to put you in a zoo. We gotta put you in a zoo for ancient creatures.
Yeah, he does say there's a lot of historians that would love to talk to you or something like that.
I was like, that is some cold shit. Like, he really like,
yeah.
Didn't he admit to Data that he killed the guy?
Yes.
Whose ship?
Did he say he killed him? Did he say he killed him?
He strongly implied it. Basically said he killed him. Yeah.
Okay. I
like,
just remember him saying that he stole the time machine.
Like, no, it's like, yeah, this. I'm not from the 26th century, but the poor soul who came to see me was, and his clothes fit quite nicely. So I mean, so he didn't say he killed him, but he killed him. And it is a time ship from the future. Like, they could have reverse engineered it.
Yeah.
Or say, hey, how does this work? We could get some good technology. Like, I don't know. I had forgotten that that's how it ends. And, I was about to say it seemed a little short-sighted, but he did really piss Picard off. I could see Picard doing like, oh, really? You think you're smarter than me? You're not smarter than me.
Yeah, it's kind of... Go ahead, Rick.
And
also,
yes,
it was a matter of, if we don't stop him, he's going to do this again and again and again.
Right. I don't think they should have just let him get back on the ship. I agree with you. But I think that they could have disabled the ship. And so at least there's a chance that he could be sent, extraditioned back to the 22nd century.
Well, also, Data was the only one, I think, who knew that the ship was on autopilot, that Rasmussen couldn't really control it. And he just didn't get a chance to say anything before the ship went boink.
You're right. He didn't say the words, the ship is going to leave. You're right. And, he should have. But even after it happened, they were not broken up about it at all.
No.
Yeah.
They're like,
and it's not like they haven't figured out some various ways of time travel. If they wanted to get him back to his own time, they could have figured out a way to do it.
Put him in
it's also amazing to me that at this point in Star Trek lore, they know time travel is possible. Many people have done it, but usually by accident. Nobody's actually built a time machine. Well, now we have one. We don't have to build it. Well, let's just let it go anyway.
Well, first of all, they may have scanned the crap out of it as soon as that door opened. So
they very well should have, yeah.
Second of all, we don't know that no one's built a time machine. We only see what's going on the Enterprise. That's not the place
but that's all
going on anyway.
That's all that matters.
If I had a time machine, I would definitely not go to the Enterprise because they get into a lot of like life or death situations, like every week, some would say. Like, I wouldn't even risk it.
I've always assumed that I've heard that before, that the Enterprise gets in all these situations. I've kind of always assumed that every starship gets into situations, and you could make a show out of any one of those ships, and it would be a good show. But
I did not assume that at all. I mean, it'd be a good show
because you don't want to be there. You don't want there. The Enterprise is off getting to have all that fun, and all we ever do is scan stuff.
Isn't that the entire premise of Lower Decks?
Lower Decks. Yeah.
And I always assumed that the Enterprise saw more action because it's the flagship. It's the like, you know, it goes on all the diplomatic missions. It goes on like it's got, you know, it's the what's the equivalent here? I don't know. It's the Robert Downey Jr., not the Paul Rudd. I don't know.
Robert Downey Jr. not to be confused with Paul Rudd.
Actually, Paul Rudd's even a bigger. I'm thinking like, you know, like Ned from from the Spider-Mans. Like he's not like all over the red carpets. I'm just saying, the Enterprise, Robert Downey Jr. I love Ned. I think he's great.
So Jim Carrey versus the Matt Frewer.
Jim Carrey and Matt Frewer. Yeah,
Sure.
Well,
I
could
do
you
like
imagine,
that.
like, with the exception of the way its career ended, like the story of the USS Grissom is probably not very exciting.
Okay, you're gonna have to explain that one to me. I'm sorry.
The Star Trek 3, the ship that's investigating the Genesis planet that
You
gets
know?
taken out with a single goddamn torpedo.
So funny story. I don't think I've ever seen Star Trek 3.
Oh,
I mean, I know of it, obviously. I know what happens in it. I think I just didn't like the premise, so I didn't watch it. And then I saw Star Trek 4, and I was like, cool. And he's back, and I don't need to see 3.
you
Yeah.
really don't. You don't.
Yeah, you can watch 2, and then you can watch the European version of 4 that has all the stuff at the beginning that we talked about. Tom, remember?
Yep.
Mhm. I listened
Has
to
all
it.
the stuff at the beginning where they basically recap the last movie.
Although
That's fine.
I'll die on this hill. I think Christopher Lloyd's Krug is like in my top 5 Klingon performances of all time.
Christopher Lloyd is always fantastic.
Mhm.
Mhm.
I do like at the end of the episode, the last thing that Picard says to Rasmussen is, "Welcome to the 24th century," and you almost want all the other officers behind him to just go, "Ooh!"
The bitch was implied. Welcome to the 24th century, bitch.
Yeah, welcome to the 24th century, biatch.
Well, and that was the thing. I don't, like I said, nobody but Data realized the ship was just going to go away on its own. So they were all like, all right, you're going to spend a couple of nights in jail while we get over the fact that you just played us all for the last 24
And we figure out what to
hours."
do with you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't think they were getting ready to airlock him or anything.
No, but again, if you look at their faces after the ship goes, they're smirking. They're like, ah. they're good with it. They're happy about it.
You're stuck now.
Everything you know
Oh,
is
did
dead.
you have a wife and kids? Mm.
No,
Until
no,
they were
no,
buried.
Was there a puppy waiting for you at home? Oh, it's gonna die.
What were you saying, Tom?
Well, think about this pod now. It's went back to the 22nd century. No one can get into it if it's coded just to Rasmussen's handprint to open.
Mm-hmm.
So
Well, we actually don't.
presumably,
Go
I was going to
ahead.
say he could presumably now just get back to Earth, go to wherever he left from.
It's this oddly symmetrical hill out in the woods of New Jersey.
Yeah.
Well, it's
Well,
like
we
the Pandorica in Doctor Who.
We don't actually know where it went. We know.
Well, no, he told Data.
Well, no,
in a few
you're right.
minutes
You're
we'll
right.
be
You're
back
right.
in
He
New
said we were going
Jersey.
back to New Jersey. You're right.
We'll be back in a place called New Jersey.
I did get the impression that he can only just barely work the thing.
Yeah, no, he's along for the ride. He's not steering. He can predict where it's going to go or when it's going to go.
He's like Doc Brown slapping the time circuits right before
Yeah.
you take off.
And that's why Picard had to move over. He's like, can't you just move over a little bit? I really don't know how to drive this thing. I'm sorry. It tells me I have to stand here, so that's what I got to do. I am not in control of this at all.
Tom Baker was also on the short list to play Rasmussen.
That would have been interesting.
That would have been good.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I think that it would have been a little, because this would be well after he played the Doctor.
Mm-hmm.
So being another time traveler and now being the quote unquote bad guy. So I'm doing air quotes a lot tonight. I'm sorry.
Well, I think that would have been the reason to have him, is because you assume that, oh, he's a time traveler, he's a good guy, but he's not a good guy.
Yeah. A Matter of Time won an Emmy Award for Outstanding Individual Achievement in Special Visual Effects. Sharing in it.
Yeah, the planet stuff was awesome.
Yeah, and it tied with another Next Generation episode, Conundrum. Picard, and I did think that this was good, and it kind of makes you think a little bit. There's a in that scene where he's talking to Rasmussen in the ready room. He says, he makes an analogy to that the history of Hitler or the history of Khan, Noonien Singh, which that's the first time that they ever like referenced Khan outside of TOS that I've ever heard. And it also makes you think how bad and how famous of a person was Khan before Spacey, because Kirk acted like he had never heard of him before, but apparently he was a pretty bad ruler and stuff before all that crap went down.
They did reference Khan. Like, they were fanboying about Khan when they found out who was on the Botany Bay. Kirk and McCoy and Scotty.
Okay.
Yeah, once they knew who he was,
I remember in that episode, I remember Spock explaining the history of Khan to everybody, and I thought it was like fill in the blanks. We've never heard it before. Please, Spock, explain all this stuff to us so that the audience can hear it too.
Imagine, all right, you find you meet a guy who has the same first name as a guy you heard about in a history class you were sort of half paying attention to 8 years ago in school. And he's like, my name's Bob. And you're like, all right, hi, Bob. And then you find out, like, oh, it's Bob Jones? Oh, okay, now I know,
Yeah, I was going to say, I imagine that Picard is a more fluent student of history than Captain Kirk.
Yeah.
Well, and also this is post Wrath of Khan. So, the events of Space Seed may be something that they read, that would be a minor blip in one history class at the Academy. But then you go back to, this is how the Enterprise ended up getting destroyed, and this is how Genesis Planet and all, everything that snowballed off of that would become a much bigger incident in the history of Starfleet. So especially someone like Picard would know that. What I was more surprised about in that little speech is it broke the trope, because it's usually like, it could be another Hitler, another Khan Singh, or another blip blop of Lord Forming. They're always like two people you've heard of and then an alien name.
Yeah. I think Rasmussen, I think he did that at one point in this episode. He referenced somebody that didn't exist or something like that.
Well, he does do his list of blind, sorry, air quotes again, blind artists.
Yeah, I think that's what I'm thinking of. And he named, and one of them was a person we've never heard of before or something like that.
But the last one was Wonder.
Yeah. Okay. Rasmussen, he asked Riker a question concerning what he thought was innovative about the Enterprise B. That is the first canonical reference to the Enterprise B in Star Trek. Data simultaneously listens to the third Brandenburg Concerto by Johann Sebastian Bach, La Donna Immobile by Verdi, Concerto
Donna Immobile
number 3. Well, look, I'm from Alabama. Concerto number 3 was played by Captain Picard on his flute in later seasons. And Donna was regularly sung by the Doctor on Voyager. Actually,
and I was going to bring that up since you mentioned it. That's the one with Tuvok, I understand.
Yeah.
You are a Vulcan man.
The Time Pod was a reuse of the shuttle Nenebek. The exterior set from Star Trek The Next Generation episode Final Mission, later reused as the Toron class Klingon shuttle in Star Trek The Next Generation Gambit Part 2. Several of the costumes and props in this episode were sold off on an online auction, including a scientist costume. And this was the last episode to air before the release of Star Trek VI The Undiscovered Country in 1991. This incident is discussed in Star Trek Deep Space Nine episode Bar Association, where Odo cites the case of Rasmussen as an example of a security breach aboard the Enterprise. Because if I remember the plot of that episode right, Odo has to take the opposing side in a hearing against Worf, and he has to and he brings up this as being something that kind of slipped under Worf's nose when he was a security chief on the Enterprise, which is a nice little callback in a later series. I wanted to bring up, Tom, I know you've read a lot of Star Trek novels. So Rasmussen appears in a Deep Space Nine novel, The Big Game, in which he was released from prison 1 year later, 1 year after this. And then he goes to Deep Space Nine and he participates in a high-stakes poker tournament held at Quarks. The novel also mentions that Rasmussen claimed to have been on Titanius 3 during the 2150s, where he met a Klingon who identified himself as a member of the House of Duras. There's also a short story called Star Trek. There's a book called Star Trek Strange New Worlds, which is a bunch of short stories. And there is a short story in that book where Rasmussen had the foresight. Berlinghoff had the foresight to hide blueprints for the time travel pod prior to his journey, and he was able to retrieve them and successfully rebuild his pod. He then traveled back. Rick, you're going to love this.
Oh, I'm already digging it.
He travels back to the late 20th century to the home of his ancestor, J.R. Rasmussen. Together, they travel back to 1964, where they relay information about the future to a television writer named Gene Roddenberry. Rasmussen died sometime before 1999 in an auto accident while driving to an appointment with producers at Paramount Pictures.
Cute.
So that's how they came up with this show. They called it Star Trek. And then he also appeared in a novel called Indistinguishable from Magic, where he collaborated with Damon Bach in a scheme to use the NX-class Intrepid NX-07 to travel back in time. He did this by pretending to work for a Starfleet team led by Geordi LaForge from the USS Challenger. Bach's plan was unsuccessful, and Rasmussen escaped by stealing a shuttlecraft from the Challenger. So there you go. This is a character that the novelists like to revisit from time to time. Which, I mean, it would have been nice to have seen him again, but I guess it was not meant to be.
he was no Harry Mudd, I'll say that.
Yeah. Well, you know, those first couple of seasons of Voyager, when they were still trying to get their sea legs or whatever, they kind of hitched their wagon to the Next Generation horse a couple of times and brought in those two Ferengi that got lost in the Delta Quadrant and stuff like that. You know, that
was the only thing that Voyager did. That, you know, I mean, they were running into Alpha Quadrant people's ships left and right in Voyager, but the Ferengi one was the only one that made any sense because they tied it right into the Barzan wormhole episode, which I thought was brilliant, and that was great.
That's all I've got. You gotta have anything else you want to? What are your thoughts about this episode overall? I guess we didn't really do that. Tom, what about you? Thumbs up, thumbs down on a matter of time.
Thumbs up. I always really enjoyed this episode. I always thought that Rasmussen was, you know, even though we said that he didn't really know how to drive that time pod, he could just steer, you know, aim it, not drive it. Mm-hmm. But his ability to go and talk his way through and out of the situations, and especially when they're asking questions about the future and any other experiences. I mean, his whole thing with Picard, he's really able. I thought his character was able to hold his own up against Picard's questioning. You know, that's a lot of bullshit that he's shoveling, but he does it very well. So this has always been one of my favorites for Next Gen. Kind of peek behind the curtain for everyone listening. I found out about being on this episode just under an hour before we aired, so I haven't seen it in who knows how long, but I think I was keeping up. So
yeah,
I knew you'd probably seen it several times, so I wasn't too worried.
It's one I'll go to, not just shuffle play. I'll actually seek this one out on occasion. So
yeah, I did like it was an added touch that Rasmussen would throw in like little lines as if he were quoting pieces of history text or stuff, when he would say things like LaForge stayed down below, Data at Panthera 4, that kind of stuff. Rick, what about you? What are your thoughts?
It's a harmless episode. I really don't dislike it. It's right, in the sentences. In my mind, it's in the same category as a piece of the action, or Trouble with Tribbles, or any of the quote unquote comedy ones. And I'm doing it the air quotes. Comedy episodes where the point of the episode is to be as silly as TNG is going to get. So the fact that the characters are really kind of behaving a little strangely, granted, I think Picard was playing it up a little more to get Rasmussen to tip his hand, but for a while there, it was like, you guys have met people from other centuries before. Why are y'all freaking out about this guy? But why did they arrest him and all this stuff? It's just a silly, light, fluffy episode, and it's fine. And the Data's line, I assume that your hand will operate that door whether you're conscious or not. It's one of Data's greatest lines ever. So it's fun. I like it. It's fun.
Yeah, if you go back and look at the list of episodes from season 5, this is wedged between like the 2 episodes that came out before this were Unification 1 and 2, and then the next one was New Ground that had to do with Worf and Alexander and all that kind of stuff. So it was nice to have a little bit of a comedic breather in between some of those heavier episodes. So
a bit of a silly sorbet.
Yeah. John, what about you?
Cleanser.
I like this episode. Matt Frewer is always a delight. I didn't watch all of this episode because I wasn't able to watch it like until 40 minutes before we started recording. So I watched the first 15 minutes and then I skipped through the middle and I watched the last 15 minutes or so. So, I mean, I watched most of it and I remembered most of it. I had forgotten about the weird Crusher flirting. So yeah, that's a strike against it. But if we, the audience, didn't see him stealing stuff, I'm agreeing with you, Tom. If we didn't see that he was stealing stuff, yeah, we knew that there was something off, and yeah, it was kind of shady. But he really was. His debating skills were like off the charts, and he made excellent points as to why he knew, or why he didn't say, or why he wanted this or that. It was really well done. It was, and yes, Robin Williams could have done it. I agree with you, Rick, but would he have done it, or would he have been zany? This wasn't zany. This was like zany wouldn't have worked. You had to be wry but cryptic. And I know from other things that Robin Williams can do that, but I don't know that he would have done that on this show.
Robin Williams, his performance, what we actually saw on the show would have been fine, but there would have been 6 hours of outtakes, right? And they would have been crazy.
Yes, and they would have had to rebuild the set.
Yeah,
I'd be, pummel horsed over the console.
All right. Well, I think that's gonna pretty much do it for this episode of the show. I want to remind everybody of our Patreon page. You can help the show handle some of the costs of podcasting by subscribing to us on Patreon for as little as $3 a month, and we'll offer you some things for helping out, including early access to episodes and special monthly episodes available only to our patrons. We'll probably be recording our June special episode probably next week sometime. So go and visit us at patreon.com/infinitepotato to find out more. And I want to thank everybody for being here on the show tonight. Tom, thank you for joining us at the last minute.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Rick, thank you very much.
My pleasure. Thank you.
I want to let everybody know where they can find you.
Yeah, you can find me on Starbase 66 right here on the Infinite Potato Alliance, or Open the Iris, the Stargate SG-1 show that we just recorded an episode of last night. And also coming up, I think it's season 4. I'm not sure. I've never done the season thing before of the Prime Direction. I have 2 interviews in the can and more coming. So,
John, thank you for joining us.
Thank you. So Tom said thank you for having me, and Rick said my pleasure. And I was going to say, and John, thank you for having me. I was going to thank you for my pleasure. But you threw a wrench in it when you asked Rick about his doings. So it would have been hilarious.
Do you want to let everybody know where they can find you?
I am the host and co-creator of Captain Game Show. I'm just kidding. It's just me. It makes me feel important and like I can collaborate with others if I say co-creator of Captain Game Show. It is the Trivia Wordplay podcast on the Infinite Potato Alliance network. I think, so we're, I think, 1 or 2 episodes away from not the big reveal of the hidden game, but the big reveal of the riddle for this season's hidden game. If you successfully decipher the riddle and solve the puzzle, you will win physical prizes, and if you are a contestant on the show, you will win contestancy prizes as well.
All righty. And our time travel series will continue in a couple of weeks when we will review the Next Generation episode Cause and Effect. Until then, remember, everyone dies. It's just a question of when.